The marketplace buzzed with life, shouts of vendors, laughter of children, the sweet tang of street food hanging heavy in the air. Maya adjusted the strap of her bag, scanning the crowd. Just another day. Then, a hand clamped around her wrist. Hard, she spun, startled, and found herself face to face with Officer Riley. His uniform was immaculate, his jaw tight, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Dark, empty, cruel. "I know your type," he growled, leaning closer. "You think you're untouchable." Maya yanked her arm, hard hammering. "Let go of me." His grip tightened. A warning. Or what? He taunted, lips curling into a smirk. Her voice rose, trembling with fury. "You're abusing your—" Bam! Pain exploded across her cheek. She stumbled back, vision swimming. Blood filled her mouth. The world tilted as she hit the pavement, palms scraping raw. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers, silence. Riley loomed over her, smirking, enjoying it. No one moved. No one helped. And then, Maya whispered under her breath, so softly only she could hear, "He just made the biggest mistake of his life." Maya groaned, the world spinning around her. Blood dripped from her lip as she forced herself onto her hands and knees. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The market was silent. People stared, frozen, watching the scene unfold. Riley stood over her, a smirk creeping across his face. His knuckles flexed, as if ready to strike again. Maya's jaw clenched. Pain shot through her skull, but she refused to show weakness. She stared up at him. "You're abusing your power," she forced out. Her voice sharp despite the pain. Riley scoffed. "Power? You don't know the first thing about it." Then crunch, Maya gasped. Her phone crushed beneath his boot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth. A man cursed under his breath. "You're done, girl." Riley's voice was cold, final. Maya's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her hands curled into fists. No, she wouldn't let this slide. "Help me," she shouted, loud, desperate. No one moved. Some averted their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. A few raised their phones, but not one stepped forward. Her breathing grew ragged. She scanned the faces, begging for someone to care. And then a quiet click. A man in the crowd, nervous, dialing a number with shaking fingers. The ringing barely lasted a second. Maya groaned, the world spinning around her. Blood dripped from her lip as she forced herself onto her hands and knees. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The market was silent. People stared, frozen, watching the scene unfold. Riley stood over her, a smirk creeping across his face. His knuckles flexed, as if ready to strike again. A voice answered, deep, controlled, dangerous. "Who is this?" The man swallowed hard. "Sir, it's your daughter. She's hurt." The cop, silence, a long dark silence. Then a shift in the air, a slow measured inhale. And then, where? The caller stammered the address. Across town, in a dimly lit house, a man sat at his kitchen table. A simple setting, quiet, still. A glass of water rested before him, untouched. His broad hands rested against the wooden surface. The knockout artist. His face was calm, his posture relaxed, but his eyes burned. Then suddenly, he moved, fast. The chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood. The glass of water shook from the sheer force. His breathing remained controlled, but his jaw clenched tight. His knuckles cracked as his fists curled. The hands of a warrior, a champion, a father. He grabbed his keys. His movements were smooth, calculated, deadly. In that moment, there was only one thought in his mind. "I'm coming, baby girl." The front door slammed shut. His car roared to life. Headlights cut through the darkness as he sped toward the market. Maya was hurt, and now someone had to pay. Maya's body ached. Her face throbbed where Riley's fist had smashed into it. She could taste the metallic bitterness of blood in her mouth. She blinked hard, trying to focus, but her vision blurred. The world around her spun. The murmurs of the crowd filled her ears. Some people gasped. Others whispered to one another, but nobody helped her. Riley towered over her, looking down at her like she was nothing, like she was weak. "Get up," he ordered. Maya's hands pressed against the pavement, her arms trembling as she tried to lift herself. Pain shot through her ribs, but she gritted her teeth. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. But before she could rise, a sharp tug on her shirt, Riley grabbed her by the collar and yanked her up like a rag doll. She barely had time to react before his face was inches from hers. His breath was hot against her skin. "Maybe this'll teach you some respect," he growled. Then his fist flew again. Crack. The impact rocked her entire body. Her head snapped back. The force of the punch sent her crashing onto the pavement. The sharp sting of concrete bit into her palms as she hit the ground hard. A warm trickle of blood ran down her chin. This time, she didn't try to get up. Her body wouldn't let her. The crowd let out another shocked gasp. A woman clutched her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. Someone shouted, "Hey, stop." But that was all. No one stepped in. No one stopped him. Riley crouched beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. He smiled, mocking, cruel. "Look at you," he said, shaking his head. "Pathetic." Maya's fingers twitched. She wanted to fight back, wanted to wipe that smug grin off his face. But her body felt like lead. Riley reached out and flicked her forehead. "Thought you were tough," he taunted. "Thought you could talk back to me." Maya's breath was ragged. Her ribs ached from breathing, but she forced out the words. "You are nothing," she whispered. Riley's smirk vanished. "You just don't learn, do you?" he muttered. Then his hand clamped around her throat. A choked gasp left her lips. Her arms flailed. She was too weak to pry him off. Maya's heart pounded. Was this it? Would she die here in the middle of the street, with no one brave enough to stop him? Her vision darkened. Only sounds of the market grew distant. And then screech, the sound of tires screaming against asphalt. It was loud, sudden, violent. The crowd turned. A black car roared into view, fast, powerful. It tore through the street before coming to an abrupt, aggressive halt. Silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the door flung open. A single boot hit the pavement. A figure stepped out, tall, broad, dangerous. Maya's blurry eyes focused, and she saw him. The knockout artist, her father. His expression was blank, too blank. But his eyes burned. Maya's lips barely moved. "Dad." Knockout artist didn't speak. He just stood there, watching, calculating. Riley turned, scowling. Who the hell? Then he saw who it was. His smirk faltered, just slightly. Knockout artist's fists clenched at his sides. A slow inhale, a slow exhale. Then finally, he moved. One step, then another. Each footstep echoed in the now silent marketplace. The crowd watched, frozen in anticipation. The knockout artist was here, and hell was coming with him. The marketplace froze. No one spoke, no one moved. Every eye was on him. The knockout artist. He stood at the edge of the scene, his powerful frame still calm, silent. But his presence, it was like a storm waiting to explode. Or his eyes locked on Riley. Not a single word was spoken. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, the occasional honk of a passing car. But within this moment, nothing. Riley adjusted his belt, squaring his shoulders. He didn't like the way people were staring, whispering. He smirked, shaking his head. "What's this? Some old man here to play hero?" Knockout artist still didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react. Maya, still on the ground, her body bruised and weak, struggled to lift her head. She saw him, her father, and for the first time since the attack began, she felt something shift. Hope. Knockout artist's hands curled into fists. His breathing was slow, measured, controlled. But there was something in his eyes, something that made even the bravest men hesitate. Riley scoffed. "You just gonna stand there, tough guy?" A tense silence. Knockout artist finally spoke. "You put your hands on my daughter." His voice was low, cold. Riley let out a laugh. "Yeah. And I'll do it again." Boom. Knockout artist moved, like a bullet. His first punch came so fast, Riley didn't even see it. A brutal right hook to the ribs. Crack. The sickening sound of bone snapping. Riley's face twisted in pure agony. He stumbled back, clutching his side. His breath vanished. His chest heaved. Knockout artist didn't stop. He stepped in.
Beer.
A left hook. Fast. Deadly. Riley's head snapped sideways. Blood splattered the pavement. The crowd erupted. Gasps.
Cheer. Cheer.
Shouts. A man in the crowd whispered,
Holy shit, that's...
"Knockout artist Riley." "That's knockout artist Riley groaned, wiping blood from his nose. His smirk was gone, replaced with rage. "You son of a..." His hand flew to his belt. He yanked out his baton, swung. Knockout artist dodged, effortless, like a shadow, a predator toying with prey. Riley swung again.
Mid.
Another swing. Knockout artist waved. Riley's breathing grew ragged, his swings sloppy.
Desperate.
Knockout artist lips curled slightly. The former champ saw his opening. His body exploded forward.
Beer. Oh.
A brutal uppercut. Riley's feet left the ground. His body lifted, then slammed back onto the pavement. A groan of pure agony escaped his lips. He rolled over, coughing, gasping. Broken.
Weak. Beaten.
The crowd watched in awe. Some had phones up. Recording. History in the making. Maya, still on the ground, watched with wide, tear-filled eyes. Riley struggled to push himself up. His hands shook. His body trembled. Knockout artist stood over him, like a king watching a fallen enemy. Riley looked up, and for the first time, fear.
Beer.
Cold. Fear. Knockout artist cracked his knuckles.
You don't hit women.
Riley swallowed hard. The crowd began chanting, "Knockout artist, knockout artist, knockout artist." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. Her father had come, and justice was being served. Riley gasped for air, his ribs throbbing with pain. His mind was spinning.
He was losing.
No, he had already lost. "This ain't over," he spat.
His voice weak.
Knockout artist smiled. "Yes, it is." Final punch. Riley's body collapsed, unmoving. The fight was over. The marketplace erupted.
People cheered, clapped, whistled.
A woman hugged her friend. A man pumped his fist in the air. Justice. Riley lay still.
Beaten, broken, finished.
Knockout artist.
Deal.
His eyes softened as he looked at the only person who mattered. Maya, his daughter, his baby girl. She looked up at him, her body weak, bruised, but she was alive. Tears filled her eyes. "Dad," she whispered. Knockout artist's hard exterior melted. He knelt beside her, his large hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I got you, baby," he said softly. A father's promise. For the first time that night, Maya felt safe. And in the distance, sirens. Justice was coming. But for now, she had all she needed. Her father, her protector, the knockout artist. The marketplace was no longer just a marketplace. It was a battlefield. The air was thick with tension, charged with something primal. The crowd stood frozen, holding their breath. Phones were raised, recording every second, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Riley lay sprawled on the ground, broken, beaten, bloodied, but not done. He coughed, his chest heaving, spitting blood onto the pavement. Then through a swollen, bleeding lip, he laughed, a dry, humorless chuckle. The crowd stared. Maya, still weak from the assault, could barely lift her head. She saw her father. Knockout artist stood there, still unmoving, a force of nature. Riley wiped his mouth, pushing himself up onto shaking arms. His body trembled. His ribs ached with every breath. His legs wobbled. But still, he smirked. "You think this is over?" he rasped. Knockout artist didn't answer. He just watched, studied, calculated. Riley pushed himself up fully, stumbling but managing to stay on his feet. He swayed slightly, barely standing. "You're just a washed-up old man," he sneered. His voice was hoarse, but still filled with defiance. "You think you can walk in here and scare me?" Knockout artist's jaw tightened. "You done talking?" he asked, his voice steady, unshaken. Riley's hand moved. Fast, too fast. He grabbed the baton from his belt, swung. Knockout artist dodged, effortless, smooth as water. The baton sliced through empty air, The crowd gasped. Riley swung again. Knockout artist ducked, missed. Another swing. Knockout artist sidestepped. Riley's breath grew heavier. His movements were slower now. Sloppy. Desperate. Knockout artist smiled slightly, like a lion watching its prey struggle. Then he struck. A single lightning-fast jab to the face. Bam. Riley's head snapped backward. His grip on the baton loosened. He staggered. Knockout artist moved in. A brutal hook to the ribs. Crack. Riley choked. His knees buckled. The baton slipped from his fingers, clattering to the ground. Maya watched, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father like this before. Knockout artist didn't give Riley time to recover. Another left hook. Bam. Riley's jaw snapped to the side. Blood splattered onto the pavement. He swayed, barely conscious. The crowd erupted. Knockout artist, a chant began. The name of a champion. The name of a legend. Riley lifted his fists, but it was too late. Knockout artist was already moving. A flurry of punches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each strike faster than the last. Each blow heavier. More devastating. Bam, 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 bam. Riley's body jerked. His eyes rolled back. His legs gave out. He collapsed. Face down. Unmoving. Finished. The marketplace exploded. People screamed, cheered. They had just witnessed something unreal. Maya's eyes flooded with tears. The knockout artist had won. Justice had been served. The legend of the knockout artist's fists had returned. Knockout artist stood over Riley's unconscious body, looking down at the man who had dared to touch his daughter. Then he turned. He walked to Maya, his face softening. He knelt beside her, placing a strong but gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked at him through blurry, tear-filled eyes. "Dad," she whispered. Knockout artist nodded. "I got you, baby." She leaned into his arms, exhausted, but safe. For the first time that night, she felt like everything was going to be okay. And in the distance, sirens. Justice was coming. But for Maya, her justice had already arrived. And his name was the knockout artist. The marketplace was still buzzing with energy. A moment frozen in time. Riley lay unconscious on the ground, his body twisted awkwardly, blood smeared on the pavement. Broken, defeated, the knockout artist stood over him, his broad shoulders rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. The fight was over. But justice, it was just beginning. Then sirens, loud, shrill, growing closer. Red and blue lights flashed across the market walls. People turned, phones still held high, recording every second. The first police car skidded to a stop. Then another. Doors flew open. 4 officers rushed forward, hands hovering over their holsters. "Step back," one of them barked, scanning the scene. His eyes landed on Riley's motionless form. Then they saw him. The knockout artist. The air shifted again. This wasn't just some bar brawl. This was knockout artist. The lead officer, a tall, broad man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "Somebody tell me what happened here," he ordered. The crowd erupted. Everyone spoke at once. "He hit that girl. The cop attacked her first. Knockout artist saved her." The officer turned toward Maya. She sat on the ground, still bruised, still shaken, but she was alive. Knockout artist was beside her, his hand on her shoulder, a father protecting his child. The officer knelt. "Miss, are you all right?" Maya swallowed hard, nodding. Her voice was weak, but firm. "He attacked me. He hit me." He laughed, while I bled. The officer's jaw tightened. He turned toward his men.
Get me that footage.
The crowd reacted instantly. People stepped forward, shoving phones into the officer's hands. The evidence, undeniable. Riley had abused his power, and then, he had picked a fight with the wrong man. 2 officers approached Riley's unconscious body. One knelt beside him, checking his pulse. The other officer, the lead, sighed, shaking his head. "Sergeant Riley," he said flatly, reaching for his cuffs, "you're under arrest."
Say.
Even in his dazed, barely conscious state, Riley flinched. He groaned, his swollen eyes blinking open, his brain barely processing the words. "One," he coughed, blood dripping from his mouth. He attacked me. The officer smirked. Tell it to the judge. With one sharp motion, the handcuffs clicked around Riley's wrists. The crowd cheered. Justice had been served. Knockout artist helped Maya to her feet. She was shaky but standing. She looked up at him, her father, her protector. You really are the GOAT, she whispered, her voice full of love and gratitude. Knockout artist chuckled, ruffling her hair. Nobody touches my family. The officers dragged Riley away, shoving him into the back of the squad car. Knockout artist and Maya turned away. They had nothing more to say. The night was over. Justice had been delivered. And now, it was time to go home. Final scene, peace at last. The house was quiet, warm, safe. Maya sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. A bandage rested on her lip, but she smiled, for the first time in hours. Knockout artist sat beside her, relaxed, calm. On the screen, their favorite movie played, just like old times. Maya leaned against her dad's shoulder, sighing. Knockout artist smirked. Don't fall asleep on me now. She grinned. No promises. A comfortable silence settled between them. The nightmare was over. And in the end, family won.